So, I have never built a computer before. Apparently, I'm going to build one now. So, yeah, I have some experience with Legos. I played with Legos when I was a kid. I had the Lego Pirate playset. I think it was called Forbidden Island or something like that. That was pretty fun. That was back in the early 90s, so it's been a while since I played with Legos. Hopefully this isn't much more difficult than Legos, right? Can't be that hard. So, computer experience. My first, might as well tell a story here while I'm here, right? My first real experience with any kind of a computer type thing would be Christmas 1984, when I received an Atari 2600 video game console. It was after the video game crash of '83, so it's not like they were super high priced at the time, but it was still pretty much a cutting edge system for the time. It was a 4-bit system, and regular Nintendo Entertainment System, the first one, hadn't come out yet. It came out in '85, I think. So I didn't get a regular Nintendo because I had an Atari. It was still fairly new at the time, so that's what I played. But yeah, that's, not really a computer. It's a video game. But it was a start. It was something. And then in elementary school, not too long after that, we had Apple II computers. And they had 5 1/4-inch floppy drives. Floppy disk drives. It was a disk, but it wasn't a CD. It was a magnetic disk instead of being optical. And it was square. So 5 1/4 inches square. Had a hole in the middle. And it was floppy. Like, it would flex. That was before they had the 3 1/2-inch floppy disks, which sometimes people called hard disks because they were like rigid. Those looked like the save icon on all of your applications. That's where that comes from. But that wasn't until later. We all started with the 5 1/4 floppies. So that was the Apple II at school, and we used it maybe once a week or something, just for a short period. Everyone in the class had to run through and get a little time with it. My first real computer that I had at home that I could really play with was a Tandy 1000. That was in 1989. That would be an IBM compatible computer, which is like the opposite of Apple, and it came from Radio Shack, apparently, is where Tandy computers were sold, although I wasn't aware of that until years later. I wasn't there when it was purchased. I just saw it at home once it arrived and got to play with it a bit. So back then, computer, IBM compatible ones, they ran on DOS. I think it stands for Disk Operating System. And so it was like having the command prompt. You just had a black screen and some monochrome letters. Like, at the time, color monitors were kind of a newish thing, and we did happen to have one, so that was cool. Yeah, so the operating system was just the command line. Like, you had to put the disk in, and then you had to run a command to make the program work. There wasn't any mouse. Like, let's see if I can get it on camera here. There we go. This mouse. Like, we didn't have that. You had to navigate with like the arrow keys and the space bar and the enter key and tab. So luckily I can do all that. I learned how to do that. That's how you had to run a computer back then. And so I'm sort of familiar with the command prompt too, because that's how you did things back then. The Tandy 1000 didn't really have a graphical user interface, GUI, but I guess it did, but it didn't load when you started the computer. You had to run a command in the command line to get the GUI to load. I can drop in a picture of it here. It was called DeskMate. You would use that if you wanted to get into a word processing program. You could open up the GUI and then you could access the word processing program through a series of tabs and arrows and enters. You could also open up a drawing program that was kind of similar to Paint. I'm not sure if it was actually an ancestor of Microsoft Paint or if it was another company, but I enjoyed the Paint program. There was a music program too. You could write your own music. I played with that a little bit. But the Paint program was fun because the computer, I don't know if it was the processor or the memory or what it was exactly, but the computer was slow. And whenever you drew something in the Paint program, the drawing program, you would draw it, and then it would re-render it. It would like repeat what you did, and then it would be on the screen. Let's see. No, that's not right. That's not right. So you would draw it, and it would be there, and you could save it. And then when you went out of the program and came back in, when it was loading your saved thing, it recreated the saved thing step by step. That's what it was. And so what I enjoyed doing was I would create animations by drawing the things one step at a time. I guess kind of like you'd do for stop motion or something. And then I would save it and leave the program and come back in. And then as it was loading the saved thing, I could see everything that I drew in order, and it would be like an animation. I could, create like a moving picture. So that was fun. That was what I did. The word processor wasn't very good at all. I got in trouble for using that at school a few times because you couldn't control the amount of space between your lines of text, and it was pretty big spaces. It was like more than double spaced on something like Microsoft Word, which wasn't really around yet. But in later years, once Microsoft Word came out and we were supposed to be typing things on it for school, I just had this old Tandy computer at home and I didn't have a new Microsoft machine. And so my typed homework looked like it was made in 1989 instead of in 1990, what would it be, 4? Yeah, just a few years difference, but man, what advancements we had in computers. So, in addition to having that Tandy 1000 to play with a little bit, I had a few games, not too much. My cousin and I would pick up TRS-80 computers at yard sales and play with those. And that was an older computer, of course, being at a yard sale. And I didn't realize it at the time, but apparently TRS stands for Tandy Radio Shack, so it was an older version of the computer I already had. But it was so old that it wasn't IBM compatible. Like IBM hadn't entered the market yet for personal computers. So those old TRS-80s were just brutal. They had a command prompt, and you couldn't exactly like just type a command and run something off disk. There wasn't like a disk drive. There was a cassette tape drive, like like an audio music cassette tape, that kind of magnetic tape. But we never had one of those that worked. And I heard they never worked real well to begin with. We had one that didn't work once, so I at least got to see what it looked like. So to get anything to run on the TRS-80, we did manage to get like an instruction book or something one time, and it It would run games, you know, they were simple games, but to get it to run, you had like the instruction sheet with like a half a page of typewritten code. It was, you know, all looked like a jumbled bunch of numbers and letters and symbols, and you had to type it all in exactly, no mistakes. And I don't think we had backspace. Like, that wasn't a thing. You couldn't like type the wrong key and back up. If you typed the wrong key, you had to hit enter, fail, to run the thing, and then start over. So you had to really carefully, it took like half an hour, type in all this stuff, and then you could run the program. Really labor intensive. It was not a work device, it was like a hobbyist's toy. I mean, it was, you know, advanced for the time. It just wasn't practical. Personal computers just weren't where it was at yet when that device came out. But, you know, later on in the 80s, they started getting regular use. I think the Tandy 1000 that I had was useful. We had a dot matrix printer. It you know, printed images with the individual dots. So Windows 3.1 came out in 1992, and that just revolutionized the computer scene, at least for personal computers. I didn't have one of those. We had them at school, so I'd get to use them at school. And my cousin had one. Well, his dad had one. He would get to play on it some. And eventually, I think they got a new computer, and he got that one passed down to him. So he had his own computer later on in the 90s. So that was pretty cool. Then we could play with that one instead of the TRS-80s. But yeah, so I didn't have Windows. I'm older than that. Eventually, in 1998, after moving to Florida, I had was basically living at work very near to the office, like 10 feet away, and I had 24-hour access to the new work computer that we purchased, and no one really knew how to use it except me. And not that I knew all that much about it at the time. I mean, just some basic stuff. But yeah, you know, having access to that was great. I think that's when I made my email account. Anyway, that's plenty of rambling. So that's computers for me. I've had a lot of computers since then. Installed things, reinstalled operating systems, formatted drives, things like that. That's just another thing, you know?